after. So of course, if there's any interesting tidbits here, you'll be able to review it later. So I am Jennifer Fine. I'm a co-founder of You Live to Travel, and we make planning group travel easy. So we're a software platform, and obviously we're very interested to see how the recovery is going to play out, which is why we've decided to organize this community meetup. Based on our last conversation, Ben Southall from Best Life Adventures just had all these questions about, like, what is travel insurance going to look like post-COVID? And we realized we needed some experts. So we were lucky enough to get Erin from Wanderwell to join in. So I will let him introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for inviting me to be a part of this. And I'm really happy to be here and to talk with you all about just travel insurance in general. Our company is Wanderwell. We're actually an insurance agency based in Portland, Oregon, in the USA. That's where I am right now. It's pretty glorious here. And and we're a part of the Transformational Travel Council, which is how You Live to Travel and Wanderwell, and Jen and I have connected, along with Jennifer Spatz, who's just came on the call too, and also pretty affiliated with 1% for the Planet and B Corp. So really just here to be a resource and answer questions and discuss anything you guys might have, any concerns or questions you might have regarding travel insurance right now.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to just put it out there that this is a conversation with experts. So it is not legal advice, it is not formal advice, it is not an offer of insurance or any of those things. So take the information that you gather here and consider it for your own business, and then consult with your own insurance agents and your own legal advisors in terms of what decisions you need to make as part of this recovery, because of course it is very local as well, and very specific to your business. We also have a surprise guest today, which is Phil from World Nomads, and he's also got an awesome background going on there. Look at that.
Yeah, no, this is the Playboy Mansion. Welcome.
Oh. That one of the standard Zoom backgrounds?
No, I had to go and find that one.
Well, thank you, Phil, for joining. Would you like to give a brief intro?
Yeah, sure. Phil Sylvester. I'm the head of PR. I've been at World Nomads for, what day is it today? 10 years and 5 days. Clocked that up this week, which is kind of nice. So frequent speaker on travel safety issues. I was the original editor of our travel safety blog, and because it's travel safety, it also means that I've had to speak about travel insurance and how that applies. I'm a tier 2 certified in speaking about travel insurance, but thanks very much for the disclaimer. I sometimes get it really wrong and get pulled up sometimes as well, so please make sure you do check anything that we're talking about here.
Yeah, and especially I think one of the key things that's happened, and Erin and I were talking about this before, that something has kind of flipped here, whereas before consumers would probably just be like, yeah, I'll buy some travel insurance, whatever, it'll be fine. And now it's going to be much more of, can I buy travel insurance? Will it cover me? I think you're going to find that people are going to be asking a lot more questions about this because it's so uncertain. But that is why advice is also really tricky, because it is uncertain and it is changing as we're all figuring out how to push this recovery forward safely. And so that's where the disclaimers come into this, because we could tell you one thing today, and then next week turns out they tried it and it didn't work and they're going to change it. So all of those disclaimers aside, I do want to ask you guys to stay on mute during the conversation, but please put things into the chat. So be sure and put kind of what country you're coming from with your question, just so that we can put it in the right context. But feel free to post any questions that you have, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can during the call. So now with our kind of intros out of the way, let's start with the sort of individual travel insurance perspective, and with the context that COVID-19 is a known event. So this is something really important within the travel insurance world, and you'll find this is brought up regularly when qualifying the answers. So the big question that I've been getting from everybody who registered for this was, will any COVID-related issues be covered at all? I'm going to throw that to Erin and give us some clues.
Yeah, thanks. This is a question that we get every day, multiple times a day. Phil, you're jump in anytime too, to add your wisdom and thoughts on this. And, know that also all the chatter going on right now within travel insurance kind of revolves around the insurers are still trying to figure out the new landscape as a result of this crisis, and how will it impact plans in the future. And there have been a couple of terms that you'll hear today that could be impacted moving forward, but we'll kind of get to them on a case-by-case basis. I think a really good standard and foundation, or a starting place with travel insurance in general, is to recognize that there are two primary forms of travel insurance, meaning like if not for necessarily living or residing outside your home country, but for travelers, for short-term travel or multi-trip travel. One of them is probably what most people are familiar with, which is trip protection, or some people call it trip cancellation plans. Generally, plans like that will include coverage for cancellation, interruption, delays, baggage, and medical, and also emergency medical evacuation. And there are some additional benefits within there too. And plans can vary from carrier to carrier, and even within each carrier, the plans can vary, even if plans sort of look alike. And the other type is travel medical only, which often is not necessarily overlooked, but you would see that those plans are being purchased by travelers who are traveling for longer times, maybe even on single trips, but you'd see trekkers or people who are going out for maybe longer than 60 or 90 days, somewhere between 60 days to a year, or maybe even 2 years. And what that kind of leads me to is that a lot of people are fearing now that travel insurance is not going to cover anything, or it's not going to cover anything related to COVID. One consistent pattern that we have found is that these travel insurance plans, both types that I listed, primarily around the world, in most cases, are actually still covering COVID-related claims for medical claims. So if you have if you've contracted COVID and you need treatment, and you file a claim for that, then the policies should still cover the COVID-related claim in that case.
And
however,
would that include like an evacuation if that was deemed necessary?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's deemed necessary, most plans that I know of will do an emergency medical evacuation that is necessary to the nearest adequate facility. And that could bring up a whole other topic too, because some people think it automatically brings you home, but for liability reasons, they take you to the nearest adequate facility.
That makes sense. But actually, so this kind of leads me to, if you contract corona while you're traveling in, let's say, Nepal, and then they're testing people for temperatures at the airports and not letting you get on planes. So then you're blocked from getting on the plane to go home because you have it. So then you're sort of forced to stay there. So then your medical care while you're in that country would be covered. Is that right?
Good luck with that one, Erin. It's a super complicated question with a super
You can definitely say it's too complicated, but it's an interesting one to explore.
It's complicated. You should have coverage for care where you are. However, when it comes to emergency evacuation, it generally is from a facility to a facility, not necessarily the point of contact. So if you're in I think a lot of companies or people will refer this as to like a field rescue. Most travel insurance does not include a field rescue. You've got to go seek care at a medical facility. And that is at the point where your coverage actually begins and where you can be evaluated to see if an emergency medical evacuation is necessary. You want to add to that?
Yeah, look, and the other thing that you said as well is like to the next nearest adequate facility. Look, we have a slightly different attitude towards that. We get you to the facility that is going to provide you the best care we can get for you. And that often means going back home to your home country. We had a case quite recently where we shifted somebody from Laos to the very top quality hospitals in Bangkok, but then back home to their home country, because it was going to be a long convalescence, and it's often best to be around your family and friends to you get the best sort of medical results from having that sort of family support as well. So it's not the nearest adequate facility, it's the nearest facility where you can get the standard of care, the best standard of care we can provide. Yeah, look, that's why I said good luck with that one. Because, and as I'm often told by our underwriting team, we don't do hypotheticals, and we don't do hypotheticals for this reason. It's like, that is a really complex scenario that you just suggested there. And that would take many days of investigation by the claims team to decide which parts of that would be paid and which would not. So I really can't give you an answer on that one straight up, except to say, and this is not an advertisement, all right, it's just, and there would be other policies like this as well, but the World Nomads policy for US citizens, US country of residence, has always and still covers you for medical expenses related to coronavirus. But World Nomads, we sell to 130 different countries. We've got like 6 different sets of underwriters, but that's the only one of our policies that has that. The other ones don't. And so you're right there, Erin. Some providers are able to cover those.
So then that brings up the sort of cancel for any reason. Sort of, is that an add-on that you can sort of add on to a lot of policies in the past? Is that still going to be an option? And if so, would that cover some of these interesting circumstances? Or is it still, it depends, even if you have cancel for any reason?
We don't offer cancel for any reason with World Nomads policies because it's expensive. And it's probably best suited to people who like circumstances such as they have elderly parents who are known to be frail, therefore they wouldn't be covered under the normal cancellation coverage rules. So, and the other one is if you, and especially in out of the US, if you kind of expect that your leave will be cancelled, your work will require you, to stay at work. That's not possible to do in Australia. They can't cancel your leave like that, and in other countries. But for those reasons, cancel for any reason. And the other reason is if you, absolutely, definitely only have 1 or 2 weeks vacation leave, and you don't want to risk that. So cancel for any reason is good in those circumstances, but you pay for it. You pay for anything that you add on, and it is quite expensive. And it still does have rules around it, like it only lasts up until 2 weeks before departure, and then it'll only cover something like 75% of all the costs. So it sounds like the answer to, all our problems, but it does have its own complications as well. Erin, I don't know how you feel about CFAR.
Yeah, I mean, we represent a handful of carriers, and from what I've seen in general, even the carriers that we don't represent, there have been a few that have exited what people are calling CFAR or CFAR, often just the acronym for cancel for any reason. In light of this situation, they have canceled it. The carriers that we represent still have it, but as Phil alluded to, it costs more. It generally is either an upgrade or it is an upgraded plan selection. So you're going to pay more. And it's what's known as, something we'll get to a little later too, it's what's known as a time-sensitive inclusion. So not only is it, well, first of all, you have to be eligible for the upgrade. Generally, it means you have to purchase the insurance plan within a time span related to the initial date of the initial trip payment of any kind. Not, I bought my flights then, so it's then, but even if I bought a $500 deposit for a trip 3 weeks ago, whatever your initial payment of any kind was for a trip, that's when your cancel for any reason clock starts. And you have generally, depending on the insurance carrier, between 10 days or maybe as much as 21 days to purchase a policy that will include cancel for any reason. Then, like Phil alluded to, you'll have anywhere, depending on the carrier, between 2 days before you actually depart, or 2 weeks in some cases, to cancel your trip and be able to be eligible for the up to 75% reimbursement if you cancel for an otherwise not covered reason.
Yeah.
So something that might happen, we might see companies totally not offering cancel for any reason in the future. We also might see companies offer it, but it might be even more of a buy-up.
And it's like 50 to 75%. Is that what you were saying? As like a general guidance for additional cost on cancel for any reason?
Depending on what else is included. Yeah.
Yeah. Just really quickly, Sherry's asking for clarification. World Nomads doesn't offer cancel for any reason.
No, not on any of our policies worldwide.
Yeah.
We do have something like 12 or 20 reasons that you can cancel prior to departure, like you get called up for military service, your company goes bankrupt, your house is burgled, you break your leg, a travel companion or a close family member gets sick. So there's a whole stack of reasons why you can cancel in the lead up to your departure.
Yeah, and so that's prior
to not any reason. There's like 12, I forget it's 12 or 20 reasons why.
Actually, that kind of leads me to the question from Rebecca here. As a baby boomer blogger that's at high risk, you know, what would they be looking for in travel insurance in terms of ensuring that any kind of pre-existing conditions are covered for their travel, since now they are at a sort of heightened risk with those pre-existing conditions?
Pre-existing conditions is by the way, to go back for a quick second, when we talk about cancellation is a pre-departure benefit. Everything after that is considered post-departure. So when we talk about cancel for any reason, it doesn't include interruption for any reason. Once you've departed on your trip, you're on your trip, and then the standard benefits apply. And Rebecca, this is actually kind of timely, your question, to be involved in this part of the conversation, because we're talking about time-sensitive inclusions in your benefits. Not every carrier's or plan includes the option for pre-existing condition coverage, or what's often referred to as an exclusion waiver. They could just say coverage, but many companies who do offer plans that have pre-existing condition coverage, the time sensitivity is somewhere around 14 to 21 days from the date of your initial trip payment of any kind, just like the cancel for any reason, but the time frame might be different. Some carriers and plans don't have any cancel for any reason, any pre-existing condition exclusion waiver. Phil, has World Nomads, what is your policy on that generally?
As I said, we've got 6 different sets of underwriters, so we've got different rules apply. For our Australia, Oceania, and I think our Europe policies, and even our rest of the world policies, there's no pre-ex, and I'll explain why. But there is for US country of residence. The World Nomads US policy is awesome. I wish it was available everywhere. It's really, really pretty good policy. And in that one, if you have, I mean, so if, what actually happens, we find, is sometimes people like Australians will go, it actually happened to a friend of mine, her husband died. He had a heart attack and died while he was on a ski trip with his son in Japan. And they were insured by, not by World Nomads, but one of our other brands. But he had he'd had a stroke like 12 years prior to that. So the claim was denied because it was deemed to be a pre-existing condition. Under the World Nomads US policy, if you have a pre-existing condition, but it is controlled by medication and there have been no other incidents, it's been stable basically for, and again, I think it's 90 days, might be 30, I think it's 90, then it will be covered, even though it's pre-existing. So, you know, again, kind of complicated, but that's why, you know, that funny little tick box where we say, I have read the terms and conditions. So that's why we ask you.
Yeah, and so that's probably going to be one of the key things that people are going to be having to decide before they travel, is just as a personal choice, and whether or not they can get travel insurance that will, well, okay, so because I think the story that's running around is you are more likely to have a bad reaction to coronavirus if you have these pre-existing conditions, these like set of issues. So does that mean if there's pre-existing conditions aren't covered, well, then it's just not covered in general, regardless of whether the issue is caused because of a stroke or because of coronavirus? It's just not covered. So even ignoring the coronavirus factor, it's like people who have pre-existing conditions need to make sure that they're purchasing insurance that provides the coverage they're looking for.
Yeah, I'd say we go. Look, and like the World Nomads, you know, Australia policy doesn't cover pre-existing conditions. That's because we have a couple of other brands under the umbrella of NIB Travel who do offer coverage for pre-ex, including one where there's an entire medical screening process that you can go through. And the result of that screening process is either we're not going to cover you at all, you're too risky. We're going to cover you for everything except that, or we're going to cover you for everything, including that at a higher premium. So, and as you get, you know, older and older, that becomes a much more you know, sensible sort of option. Because, you know, you get what you pay for. Don't, you know, never confuse cheap and good. You know, like insurance is like, never assume you're covered for everything, because you're not. Every policy will exclude things to design a product for a particular audience. If you want it all included, we can, you know, we can design a product that's like that, but you're going to have to pay for it. And of course, people in the past have been very price sensitive. It's pretty much a grudge purchase, and people have gone looking for cheap without considering that cheap and good don't always go together. And I think that's about to change. I think this is the discussion we're having right now. People are going, okay, I don't want to, I just want good. I want to know if these things are covered. And they can be, and they probably will be if you're prepared to pay for it.
Well, and so I just got this great question from Carl. And so he's sort of feeling like, oh boy, all these different corner cases and things like that. Like, can we get a kind of an overview of what is usually covered? And I know you guys are going to like this question, but can you give a high level of like, what should people expect from their baseline travel insurance, and then add these complexities on top?
That is, it's not a tough question. It's just it's a long answer. So I think what's really good to set proper expectations is, first of all, to know that which benefit we're discussing. When it comes to cancellation and interruption, in general, and there are many more reasons, but the plans are designed to cover cancellation and interruption due to injury, illness, or death to the traveler, a travel companion, or an immediate family member not traveling with you. Now, it can vary from there too. It doesn't have, not every plan is going to be the same, but for injury, illness, or death, we'll keep it at that, and everything within there can vary. Also, unforeseen or inclement weather, unforeseen inclement weather, or undocumented inclement weather. People often think of this in terms of like a hurricane. Generally, when a hurricane is named, you know it's it's foreseen. It's been forecasted. So that's why a lot of people are calling COVID even back in early February, saying, "Hey, COVID, it's a named hurricane. It's here." So that's the second reason, or primary reason why what the cancellation is or interruption is covered. Third would be a unforeseen terror event, which has become more of a concern in the public eyes. Whether it's more of a concern as to the actual risk or not, we don't, that may be different. But in the public eye, unforeseen terror event is often thought of. And then also what has come up more very recently is a carrier default or a bankruptcy by the carrier, by the cruise line or an airline. Generally not the company that's booking travel, unless it is also the company booking travel is also the carrier that you're traveling with.
And so that's generally covered, I think you said, as a time-sensitive inclusion coverage.
It really depends on the carrier and plan. With some it might be, with others it's just included or not included at all.
Can I give a further explanation of that? If you take a lot of expensive electronic equipment away with you, you're an amateur photographer and you've got massive lenses and what have you, have a look at the policy that what is the benefit limit for loss or damage to your possessions. If it's low, that's not the policy for you. Go find another one that's got higher coverage. And as a matter of fact, go and join some photography club because they've probably got a specialist deal that cover your equipment. And each policy is designed for a particular, niche. And World Nomads has, it's changed a lot, but the original idea was we didn't have a lot of coverage for trip delay or trip interruption because we kind of figured these people were backpacking around the world for 3 to 6 months. And if you can't get out of Bangkok this week, you'll just go back to the hostel and you'll travel in a couple of days' time. And it's really no big deal because your plans are flexible. But if you've got, 1 week vacation from your Wall Street job in New York and you have to be back home, then you're going to need really good, trip interruption and trip delay coverage because it's going to be expensive to get yourself back home on time. So that's what we mean when we say, think about your circumstances. What type of traveler are you? And don't assume you're covered for everything. Pick the product that kind of suits you.
And so I think the thing that I've heard from our conversations is there's sort of trip cancellation, which is pre-departure, trip interruption, which is post-departure. And then there's kind of coverage of things that can happen like medically while you're on the trip, right? So those are the kind of like 3 big categories that I've heard you guys kind of bounce around.
Yep.
And I think purchasers of travel insurance need to think about what level of coverage they need for all those categories. And then like when they're on the trip, are they just protecting their own bodies like medical? Are they also protecting equipment? And somebody asked a question, because you guys have touched on this, family members. If your traveling partner gets ill while on travel and you have to stay with them, is that kind of covered, or is it sort of each individual's policy applies?
World Nomads covers that.
Okay.
But I see a vast amount of plans that will cover that. Even if the spouse is not traveling with that person, many plans will actually fly your spouse to be with you bedside. It's bedside benefits.
Oh, wow. That's lovely. Okay. So just a quick, easy one here from Emily. Can a Canadian purchase travel insurance from an insurance company from the US or other country?
Yes, because we cover lots of, we get this question all the time because we have people who, Brazilian, American, UK, who are in Australia when they are about to recommence travel. And they say, what's my country of residence? And to put it bluntly, it comes down to, if the worst happens, which country do you want us to send your bits to? Where's mum?
Oh.
Right, so, okay. And considering that, jokes aside, if you are ill and we need to medically repatriate you so that will convalesce at home, where's home? Where have you got home medical coverage? If you're American, then if you're Canadian and you buy a US policy, we'll send you to a US hospital on the way home, and you'll be faced those costs in the American system. So put Canada, Canada as your country of residence, please.
That's a really good way to think about it then. So it's, what is the country that you want to be sent back to in the worst case scenario? So,
and it's going to depend on the insurance carrier too. I mean, there are carriers, especially in the US right now. If you're in the US, or if you are a US resident, it's going to ask you what state you live in. Like, it's going to come down to, you're not going to necessarily have a different cost depending on the state that you're living in, but we are in a very unique moment. We were about to be in a very unique moment in the United States. This is the boring stuff, so I'll keep it really short. But for the first time, travel insurance was about to be not federally regulated in the United States, but nationally. The reason I'm saying there's a difference between the two is because it wasn't federal legislation that was going to come together to regulate travel insurance. It was actually all the states, except for 2, that were coming together to agree on a piece of legislation and say, okay, we're going to make sure that we can give everyone pretty much similar benefits, depending on what state they live in. Because your policy can differ depending on what state you live in. The cost may not, but the policy could differ. And also, if you were, let's say, a Canadian citizen but wanted to buy a US plan, some carriers won't let you do that. On the other hand, a lot of these companies that are doing this, the insurers, are considered offshore carriers. So they may be domiciled outside of their home country, but have offices in their home country. And that can mess up some of the benefits, not mess up, but it could make some of the benefits confusing or skirt some of it. And it's difficult to know what you're getting into sometimes because of that.
So can I ask a clarifying point for those? Like, obviously this is quite complex. So is this kind of the case where if you have some of these really complex questions and you are in a unique situation, is that what an agency like Wanderwell, is that, kind of some of the value that you provide there, is helping them navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That comes in a lot when we have a lot of people who just come to our site and they'll search for a plan and they'll purchase, and they don't want to talk with us, and that's fine too. But we have a lot of people who will come and contact us, especially group travel. So if we've got companies that are leading group trips, they might have 10 people on one trip from 5 different countries. They might even have 10 people on one trip, but from 6 different states. What happens if everyone wants canceled for any reason, but people from New York can't get canceled for any reason? New York as a state doesn't even allow cancel for any reason. They won't allow it. Yeah, it's wacky, right? You can be from a different state and have different benefits, and then your cost is different. So that's another reason why it's good that we're in this moment, which is probably going to be delayed by about a year, where if you are in the US and you want to buy an outbound policy, hopefully in the next 2 years, everyone's policy is going to be kind of like, they're just going to equal out.
It really is like 50 different countries, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of designed to be in some way, but it really can mess things up a lot.
Well, so this brings us to, so the topic of lots of different countries and lots of different rules. Like the thing that I see coming, and we talk about in Australia in terms of the Tasman bubble, like, all right, well, Australia will allow its citizens and residents to, or say that they can travel to Australia. So they're going to remove the do not travel restriction and say, exercise caution or something like that. So right now, Australians cannot purchase travel insurance to go to New Zealand because the government says, don't go. As soon as the government creates that Tasman bubble and says to Australians, you can travel to New Zealand, but exercise caution, then what happens? Can Australians buy travel insurance then to go to New Zealand?
Do you want me to take that one, Erin?
Yeah.
We have suspended sales for the time being. It's not fair to sell a policy at the moment when, especially the Australians, can't go anywhere anyway, so we're not even selling policies. That's partly because it's not fair. It's also, we can't if you buy a policy right now, we can't provide the services that we contract with you to do. So we're not going to sell you a policy because we just can't do our job at the moment.
Right.
So once we resume selling again, and we generally have a do not travel warning would be reason for us to not provide cover for that country. As a matter of fact, if you're on a Nomad site and you put in one of your destinations and it's on a restricted countries list, a pop-up will appear and it will say, we can't offer cover for this destination because the government do not travel warnings. We've taken it out of your quote. So we won't even add it for you. Mm-hmm. At the moment, the entire world's on that list. So, you know, hopefully very soon, New Zealand will be able to take it out of that and it'll pop up in your quote calculator and you'll be able to buy a policy.
Mm-hmm. So it will be country by country. So like, let's say I decide to go on a cruise, you know, I'm going to fly to New Zealand and I'm going to rent a sailboat and I'm going to cruise around in the Pacific and maybe I stop in one of those islands there. I won't be covered in that island country, let's say Fiji, if Australia hasn't restricted their do not travel restrictions, right? So so it will be country by country as it always has been, but now it'll be even more complicated, right?
Okay, you just blew my mind then. I don't know.
Okay, don't do that.
Oh man, somebody on a yacht. Okay, I hadn't thought of that one. You give me some homework there. I don't know. Erin, any idea?
I mean, it feels like there's kind of like no rules and then everything's a rule.
Yeah.
You know, the most classic example coming from the United States would be the Cuba embargo. So you can buy travel insurance to go to Cuba. You are covered. From a medical standpoint, Cuba and the United States don't have formal contracts. So when you've got an insurance carrier that is known for its global provider network, so you can get medical care and direct payment, if you're in Cuba, you don't have that access, right? So that's something that's always been around. Or I'm not sure if World Nomads does this. I know not every carrier does this, but most carriers do have destination pricing. So if you say that I'm going to this country, there's a rate factor, a multiplier in there. So you actually could have, your insurance could be more expensive if you're going to, Europe than it is to go to Mexico. You know, a lot of carriers, I know their rate factor is actually pretty low to go to Mexico, maybe because the evacuations are less expensive if you want to come back to the United States, if you're from the United States or from Canada or from an adjacent country in South America. And all that could change. You know, that I know some carriers are moving in the direction of saying, let's flatten everything out. So it's not going to matter where you go. We'll just composite rate it. Some carriers are doing that.
Yeah. The major multiplier we apply is for travel to United States because of the expensive medical coverage there. Oh. We do have regions, but you can buy, if you want to buy World Nomads coverage for global coverage, you've got two options. Everywhere, including the United States, or everywhere excluding the United States. And the one excluding the United States is cheaper because of that.
Right. But would that mean that because Cuba has a pretty low cost sort of medical care system, so does that mean it's, you know, like if you're going to get sick while you're traveling, you want to do that in Cuba because it'll be cheaper?
Almost everywhere in the world outside of the United States. I think that's where Phil's going with this. It's really expensive to get your medical care in the United States, and that happens. You know, we a lot of our work is in expat plans or missionary plans and student plans. In those plans, you can also say, I'm going to be living outside of my home country, and I either want country coverage everywhere except for the United States or everywhere including the United States. And like Phil said, those are for even long-term plans that are medically underwritten, and it's a lot more expensive if you get coverage that includes the United States. The other one is Antarctica, and that's because emergency evacuation from Antarctica is like 3 times the average of everywhere else in the world.
Can I give another extreme case? Just think about North Korea as well. You can travel to North Korea if you can arrange it. It's very difficult. But if you go to North Korea, There are no government do not travel warnings to North Korea, so you can go there. But if you get sick in North Korea or end up in a hospital in North Korea, we have no way of paying your bills. We have no provider relationships there.
Right.
We can't come and get you. We can't fly an evacuation, a medical air ambulance into North Korea. We just can't provide what our job is. So we don't offer cover. It's like, good luck, enjoy North Korea, but we can't come and get you if we need to. So we're not going to take your money.
Well, so that's a good kind of point in terms of, if you can purchase travel insurance to a destination, and as things start opening up, you guys are doing your due diligence, your underwriters are doing your due diligence. If you're offering it, then you're going to cover what you say you're going to cover, right?
It's a contract. It's
yes.
a contract.
So if your travelers can acquire travel insurance to go to Nepal, let's say, which was one of the questions that we had, are some of the sort of emerging countries that maybe don't have as robust of medical systems, are they going to be some of the last ones to get covered? And the answer is really actually based on what each of our governments says. So if Australia says that as an Australian resident, I can travel to Nepal, then I can purchase some kind of travel insurance from some carrier. And what it covers depends on that carrier. But if my government says, no, you can't travel, then it's kind of the North Korea situation. It's like, well, I mean, you can go, but we can't help you, right?
Yes.
It also depends on the benefit, right? What are we talking about? Because cancellation's gone now, right? You're already in that country. So is it interruption? Is it the delays and baggage, which are a totally different type of benefit? Or is it the medical? A lot of travel medical plans are just purely, you have coverage anywhere you are in the world. Now, you may have to pay out of pocket, save your receipts, submit a claim in whatever language your receipt may be, and which is great. Every carrier is going to have a translator in their claims department for that, and you could get reimbursement. At the very worst case scenario, if it's a covered reason, you get reimbursement.
Yeah.
In the best case scenario, like Phil was alluding to, you may actually have the insurance carrier should have contacts or a global assist team that can actually arrange for direct payment, or to even extract someone if they need to be, or to have acute coverage or acute care that is covered, that where the insurer can actually be an advocate for you.
Yeah, look, our emergency assistance teams have medical staff as part of the team. So we can make an assessment in consultation with the insured's, doctors who are treating them at the time, about, how dangerous their situation is, what's the best sort of treatment and prospect for recovery, and if they're in the safest place or whether they need to move. So, medical considerations make up a very large part of our decisions there. But, you just get sick or something and you need to go to a medical clinic. If there's not a do not travel, then, once travel starts opening up, and it's always been country by country. Prior to this, there are about 13 nations that a do not travel applies to, and they're, the obvious ones: Yemen, anywhere where there's a hot war.
Yeah, exactly.
Quite a few really dangerous sort of West African countries, things like that.
Well, can I throw an interesting Corona one at you? So let's say, Australia is opening up and I feel fine. So I book my flight to New Zealand, and that I buy travel insurance. I do all the things, all the right things. And then, let's say 2 weeks before, I get sick in my own country from coronavirus. And so I'm not going to be allowed to go to New Zealand. Would any policy potentially cover that?
That is one of the things that we're considering and planning for before we lift our suspension of sales. When we come back, we want to hopefully copy what our US policy does and have coverage for medical expenses. And that's part of the consideration, exactly that scenario. So when we start selling again, and that's an obvious scenario to come up. Is that going to be covered or not? And it's not just, I mean, it's changing a policy is complicated. You know, we have, it's a very complicated process. It's very legal in its execution as well. And there are a lot of stakeholders who need to be brought on. So, but of course we have teams of people who do that. It's just a slow process, but yeah, we absolutely right now know, but we know when we come back, that's the sort of scenario we're going to have to cover.
And so then if we take that sort of line of thinking, Carl's question is kind of one step further. So let's say I actually, you know, probably acquired it in Australia, but I'm not symptomatic. So I pass the screening, I get on the flight, I get to New Zealand, and on the flight, I actually I develop a fever. So when I land in New Zealand and they scan me, they'll say, oh, you have a fever, you're refused entry.
Depends what the policy you buy at the time and the wording of that policy. Look, the thing to remember is that robots don't process these claims. People do. When you make a claim, somebody looks at it, reads it all, and they judge every claim that's made on its merits, which is why I can't answer that one, because that would take some investigating. What did the policy say at the time? When did you buy the policy? You know, or what are the government rules? All of those things get investigated by a person. And believe it or not, I know it's hard to believe, but sometimes we're always looking for a way that we can pay. There are often contradictory clauses in an insurance policy, and one of them would be a reason to deny a claim, and one of them would be a reason to pay the claim. And we have to weigh that up. And eventually, to our underwriters, we have to be able to justify the decision, you know, and customer service is a very big part of that. But which is why it's complicated. So there may be, you know, one part of the policy that says no, another part that says, yeah, it could be covered, which is why you should always lodge a claim. The worst that can happen is we say no.
Totally. Right. I mean, and Phil and I, neither of us are claims examiners. So we couldn't be able to give, you know, each situation is so different. And when we hear about a claim, it's usually, this is what happened to me. And we like, great, I believe you. Here's what you need to do to file a successful, or to even have an opportunity to file a successful claim. And it comes down to, you know, Jen and I have been using this phrase a lot in the past couple of weeks of a positive insurance experience is born in appropriate expectations. Know what to expect from your policy. If you know that you have a pre-existing condition and you know you didn't buy the policy in time, and so your policy doesn't cover pre-existing conditions, you know what to expect. And, you know, you probably might be disappointed, maybe even in yourself, but if you go to through a claims process, which, by the way, even in that situation, I always say, file the claim. Let's see what happens. Because a claims examiner is going to look at it and determine really get to know your situation. Claims examiners do their due diligence, and they're going to be able to say, let me look at the whole scope of your situation. You know what? Okay, here and here and here, I think you can get $700 back, or you get the whole claim back, or you get nothing back. It is a human experience, and it's good to remember. And even the purchasing, a positive thing that could come out of this great reset is, first of all, there might not be a lot of claims that come out of this from now on, from moving forward within the reset until people start to travel again. But also, perhaps travel insurance is going to become more engaging, where the traveler is going to say, I'm gonna not only shop this, I'm gonna ask the right questions, and I'm going to make sure I get the one that is right for me and fits my expectations.
We've been begging people to do that.
Yeah.
You know, for years and years and years. It's like, we don't want you to get, I mean, it's basic. If you go off and you buy a policy and you have a crap experience, you're never going to buy us again, or you're never going to travel again. Yeah. And travel is such a fantastic thing. It's such a force for positive change in the world that we want people to have a great experience and travel again. So yeah, and look, assuming coverage is the biggest mistake that everybody makes. And I welcome this new, interest in people on, and come and ask us all the questions you want to do, because we've been begging you to ask those questions for so long. I think there's a flip side on that as well. And I think because people, it's been a bit of a grudge purchase. People don't really want to spend money on travel insurance, and it's been the practice of insurers to have low barriers to purchase. It's like, don't put stuff in the way of people getting around to buy a policy, because they'll just turn off and they'll go somewhere where it's easier. We've had a couple of experiences in this where people have accused us of changing the policy wording halfway through to exclude pandemics. No, it was always excluded. You just didn't read the policy wording. It's a contract. We can't change it. We haven't changed it. You didn't read it. You didn't understand it. Which you can't really say to people. Really sorry you've had a bad experience. This is why I'm not on the customer service team, by the way. But what I suggest that we do is, I think the tick box is going to die. We can't, yes, I've read it. Nobody's ever read it and understood the terms. They just tick the box so that they can purchase. But I think, I do it myself. I tick the agree box on apps I download all the time. I've no idea what I'm agreeing to. Oh. But I think what we might actually find is that the insurers will actually put more onus on the traveller to make sure they really do understand. And it's just, simple gamification. You can ask 2 or 3 questions like, I am covered for medical expenses from a pandemic. Yes, no. Tick a box. I don't need a license to ride a motorcycle abroad. Yes, no. If I'm drunk, my medical expenses will be covered. Yes, no. And you've got to get all of those right. And the answers there are no, right? You've got to tick all 3 of those before the buy box appears.
Yeah.
That's huge. That'd be great. Another one that I see come up is this, not anymore, because things changed a few years ago, is on the pre-existing conditions. Used to be that the pre-existing conditions not only was for the traveler, but also for the family members that weren't traveling with you. So if you had no pre-existing condition coverage and your elderly father had a pre-existing condition and wasn't traveling with you and got sick and died, then you weren't covered. That doesn't even happen anymore. But imagine just in that little gamification within the 5 questions, if you're like, yo, do I have this? Or what happens if my mother gets sick and she's not traveling with me? Just to know and have those expectations properly set would be so great, because insurance gets, travel gets the glory, and it should, and we want to keep it that way. And it'd be great for people to actually have these positive insurance experiences. And by the way, the more those expectations are met and actually understood, the more the other side of insurance, which really is, it's all about risk, the less claims that actually may come in or be needed.
And cheaper it gets. Yeah.
And that makes cheaper plans, right? That brings down the cost of coverage. It's all a interconnected organism, and it's going to be even more so now. When people start traveling again.
So can I throw an interesting hypothetical at you around limiting risk? Now that a lot of countries are releasing apps to do contact tracing, do you think that insurance providers might either give you a discount or require that if you're traveling to the United States, you have to download the US contact tracing app?
Great idea. Thanks for that. There's problems with US coverage because it's a financial services product. You can't offer discounts on it.
No discounts,
Okay.
Discounts are tricky in the US, but yeah.
But you might be able to require that even to just purchase it during a time when it's, there are still pocket outbreaks. And so you just want to, because for maybe your own risk assessors might want to know the contact tracing data.
We kind of have to trust the health authorities in each country. So if your chief medical officer says it's necessary for people in that country to have a contact tracing app to reduce the risk, and it is required by them and it's mandatory, then yeah, but I don't think we would impose those ourselves. We would.
So the governments, so the
if
US.
the government says it's mandatory to download this, then and you haven't, then you've broken the law, so that would not be covered.
Gotcha.
A different version of this, unrelated to COVID, kind of pops up once in a while. So, for example, Ecuador for a few years, and still the Galapagos alone as part of Ecuador has said, we require, if you're coming from the United States, we require you to have travel insurance. Yes. So if you want a visa to enter our country, you have to have travel insurance. A few other countries have done this here and there. It's like it's like a wave at a time, right? So a country will do it for a while and then that settles and they don't do it. And the reason, going back to other parts of our conversation, is that countries that have a national health system, which is almost all of them except for the US, when tourists come to their country and they don't have travel insurance and they're not filing a claim, they're using the resources and the money of that country, right? So it's not COVID related necessarily, but it could all come together at some point to be related, like you're saying, in having a contact tracing app, in having travel insurance just to enter. There's some precedent, even though it's not totally related, but it's based in the government locally, not the travel insurance, not the insurer.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so I think that's actually a really important aspect here, is that the insurance providers are really sort of operating under the policies set by the governments, right? So if Australian government tells its citizens and residents you cannot travel, then insurance is not provided to those Australians. So it really depends on where your policy is coming from, right? And I suppose that's why it gets complicated for a lot of us digital nomads, in terms of, we're often in different countries, and so I think that's a really interesting one that I know is quite complicated. But I think my goal, just sort of recognizing that we're sort of end of time here, is first of all, I just wanted to start this conversation because I think this is fascinating in terms of how do we get from we cannot travel to we can actively, as our clients, the travel retailers, can actively start saying, look, we think it is going to be reasonable to travel because the travel insurance is available, but here's the travel insurance questions you need to be asking in order to go. And that might either come from just having had a conversation with someone like Wanderwell or World Nomads in terms of, here's our advice on what you should tell your travelers to purchase. Or it could be literally required to get a visa into that country. So it could be, you can't enter this country unless you have travel insurance that has this medical coverage, for example. Does that sound about right?
Could happen.
Yeah, look, yeah, it could. And I think we're going to see, like you need a yellow fever vaccination certificate to travel around. If you've been to a country where it's a potential risk, you need the certificate to travel into the next country so you don't spread it.
Mm-hmm.
You may, I don't know, you may end up with a coronavirus certificate that you need before you can enter a country as a part of a visa regulation. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, then I will say thank you to our expert guests. So Erin Fish from Wanderwell and Phil Sylvester from World Nomads. I do encourage you all to connect with them and reach out if you have specific questions. And I want to give each of you a chance to kind of leave people with a final thought on travel insurance.
Okay, I've just changed my background to my local beach here in Sydney.
So your message is come to Sydney.
Yeah. Look, ask questions. I know this was kind of set up and I kind of hijacked it a little bit, Erin. So I apologize for that, mate. Yeah. But I love the way you see it. You see travel insurance the way we do as well. So I'm going to make sure I connect up with you as well. We got to stay connected. I love it very much. Yeah. Look, travel insurance. Ask questions is the thing that we're here to try and make it easy for people. We understand it's complicated. Hypotheticals are complicated. But, you know, we have people who can help address those things. Travel itself in a country, it's not going to be the same. That's for sure. You know, are you going to need that coronavirus certificate? I don't know what's going to happen. And I flip-flop between optimistic and being pessimistic, depending, you know, like the boss of our main international Qantas, you know, he's saying, well, if we have to do, you know, social distancing on planes, fares are going to go up by 50%. So that's pretty scary. But in the end, we have to remember that, and this is a moment for the world to realise this as well, but travel and tourism accounts for 10% of global GDP. It creates 1 in 11 jobs in the world. And most of those jobs, about 65% of them, are, you know, low-end manual jobs. They're waiters and bar staff and house cleaners and people like that. And they are generally in developing nations, and international travel has lifted millions of people out of poverty and created opportunity and advancement for them, which is the positive thing about travel. And I think people seeing it now suddenly switched off, especially at government level, they'll go, oh, okay, this wasn't just a bit of fun where you can go, you know, traveling around. It was actually more important to the world than that. You know, I'm loath to say it, but, you know, international travel and tourism is probably too big to fail, too big to be allowed to fail. So I think governments everywhere are going to go, well, you know, it's been an unbelievable driver in ending poverty globally in the last 10 to 20 years. How do we make that happen again? That's the, you know, the optimistic side of me. I think people and general public as well will say, oh yeah, right. Look, we did that. Let's do that. Let's do that again, but let's do it better this time as well, which brings us into, you know, responsible and sustainable travel and supporting development in you know, poorer nations as well. Like now people know how good travel is for the world. Let's do it better.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. And Erin, final word from you.
Yeah, and thanks for having us on, Phil. It's really good to collaborate with you. I believe that collaboration is key, and that is how we innovate and how we refine and create relationships overall. And because we are, no matter what, with travel, with insurance, all this, we're all in this together. And we're in a moment right now. I know it sounds kind of like cliche, but I really truly believe it. Travel is what connects all of us on this call in some way. We're in a moment right now where there is this reset that we're all involved in, and we have all been able to contribute a lot to travel, and we're so enriched by it. No matter what experiences we have, whether it's just leisure, even on business travel, whether it's just learning new languages, really getting involved in learning about cultures, and we've in some way taken a lot from the world, and we can accept that this moment might be a way for us to also give back and say, okay, world, take a breath, so we can turn around and have a more regenerative future in travel, not only regenerative environmentally speaking, but socially and for humanitarian purposes, that could lead to more sustainable, regenerative economic growth, to, like Phil was saying, for people to have jobs and for us to be a little more mindful. And where insurance may come into the travel part, really it's just about having some peace of mind. And I hope that within this conversation and moving forward, that what we can bring to it and what you guys can bring to it with the questions you bring can help us to refine that process and set expectations accordingly and appropriately.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you everyone for coming and listening. I have a feeling we're going to have some follow-up conversations as this continues to morph and when the world really starts to reopen for reals. So I agree. Optimism. I'm definitely feeling it right now, and I'm gonna ride that wave for a little bit. So thank you guys. Yeah.
Question to follow up on travel insurance related to that. I don't know if many of you are tour operators but one of the big questions I have now are, policies for operating tours, and I don't know if there are any connections that YouLi has, but it would be an interesting one. As you know, those of us in the industry start renewing our insurance, what does that look like right now? Because, you know, we're not operating tours, but then, you know, you kind of, once you get that policy, I don't know, it's interesting, like a broker or a couple of brokers, I don't know, if Erin or Phil, if you guys work with anyone or recommend anyone that,
I do. But at the same time, I think what's really important, this is coming up a lot, what's really important to keep in mind is that this is not only an insurance question, it's also a best practices question. And I think that's, so what I've noticed is a lot of travel planners that are in a situation like yours, where maybe you book trips, people paid you, you paid an operator, and then this happened, and your customers may want a credit or a refund, but then the operator that you worked with may not be refunding you. You know, there's this supply chain.
right, right.
So this is a time when I'm noticing a lot of travel planners are actually restructuring their agreements with the operators and restructuring the contracts with their traveling customers to, again, set expectations for, well, what happens if a trip is canceled? Well, you know, maybe internally you agree to not pay your operators until 2 days before the trip happens, just like insurance does, right? Where there's time sensitive, or there's milestones that need to be met. At the same point, there have been trips and companies that operate and manage trips or festivals that survived because they had an insurance policy to protect them in this type of situation. Unfortunately, there were others that didn't. I mean, look at Austin City Limits. You know, in Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
They didn't have an insurance policy for it. There's a chance they're never going to have their festival again. You know.
So is this our next topic, Jennifer? Is that your suggestion?
Well, no, it's not only that, but just like, you know, we're on pause right now operating tours, and what's the sense in renewing your overall policy? And like, it's like, okay, we're still hoping to be in business a year from now or whenever we start running our tours again. But I guess the big question is, you know, what are other operators doing? What's the insurance industry doing? I don't know. It's something I'm just starting to look into. So
Just a guess, but I kind of figure anybody that provides any type of insurance would be desperate for business right now, and I think you're in a pretty strong negotiating position.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, everyone. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to Phil or to Erin or to myself. And please follow us on social media if you're interested in our upcoming topics. We always like to hear from people. Like, this conversation is based on Ben Southall's request. So yeah, please let us know what you want to talk about. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you all. Enjoy your weekend.
Bye.